it doesn't really matter where you start the season anymore. 12 teams get in the playoff. And like Indiana proved a year ago, a team that finished first in the country, 16-0, national champs, one of the best teams we've watched in the modern era, they started the season ranked 18th. Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy. So happy to have you here with us today. It's one of our favorite shows of the year. We have long been told by many, by those in the C-suites, that we should be doing rankings all throughout the offseason. We have pushed back on that. Why? Because if we were to do a ranking in, say, February or January or April or June, like many publications, it'd be an inaccurate picture. It'd be misleading, and we'd have to go back on some of our thoughts because some new information might be made available, and we just have not found it to be very helpful. So we give one ranking a year, and that ranking begins to get unveiled today because the AP poll doesn't come out for another week. So we have about 7 days, and hopefully this is the only ranking anyone's talking about. We also have the coaches poll, and you can take that with a grain of salt if you want, but we feel like we want to go first. We don't want to react to the AP poll. We want to give you our own. This is where we stand right now, and we always break this show up into 2 episodes. Today, we'll do 25 through 11, and then a couple days from now, we will release our top 10. I need to give you 2 rules, however, before we start, because without them, about 6 of these rankings are going to look like typos. Rule number 1, schedule. Schedule, okay? ACC and the SEC both added a 9th conference game this year. That's not a footnote. That landed on a very specific set of programs like a piano, okay? It's why Oklahoma has maybe the second toughest schedule in America, why Texas is in the top 3, Ole Miss in the top 5, Florida in the top 7, whatever it might be, right? So those teams are probably going to play better football than their overall record might say. Meanwhile, there are some teams on this list that are playing, say, I don't know, the 62nd hardest schedule that might finish 9-3, and they might get treated as if they've proven something, whereas maybe they didn't. And granted, we don't know exactly how schedule strength's going to sort out. We just go based on the information that we have right now. Looking ahead, how we evaluate some of these teams, we recognize that there are a handful of teams that have a much trickier path to get to a 10-2 ranking that would warrant potentially a top 10 ranking overall. So today, I'm going to be ranking football teams, not necessarily ranking calendars, okay? But I will admit, schedule, projected win totals, that factors in as well. Another rule here, rule 2, that's returning production. And that's the one that I go off of very heavily when putting this list together, and not necessarily returning starters. Returning production means a whole variety of different things. It might mean snaps. It might mean yards. It might mean offensive line continuity. Who did the work last year and who is still here to do it again, right? Who's stronger? Who's going into year 2 as a starter? Part of that also has to do with returning production, coaching continuity. That's a factor for me as well. I think that's very valuable in the modern era because here's the thing that's been true every year of the portal era. The teams that bring back the most oftentimes improve on average by maybe in some cases a full game in the win column, and the teams bring back the least, there's some unevenness to their play. But this is exactly why you can't just read the chart when it comes to returning production and fill out your ballot. You look at Clemson last year, that's the optimal case of don't use returning production as the end-all be-all. They led the entire country last year going into the year, and they went 7-6. So the number tells you where the floor is, but it doesn't necessarily tell you where the ceiling is. It absolutely does not tell you whether or not the production coming back is the production that actually matters. So that distinction might be the entire show today. So we're looking forward to getting to it. Like I said, today is 25 through 11. We will also give you some notable omissions that were right there, right on the cusp. Teams receiving votes category, we'll give you those as well. But before we do, if you could, just go and subscribe to the podcast. Wherever you get the podcast, doesn't matter where. You can also check us out on the ESPN College Football YouTube page. So let's kick things off with the first teams out. There's 8 teams that didn't quite make the top 25, and I want to kind of go through the reason why, right? We'll start with Missouri. I love this team, but they lose a lot of really quality players along the defensive line. You lose some quality pieces in the back end. You're breaking in some new safeties. It's not necessarily a reload. It's a kind of, especially on the defense side, a bit of a fresh install at multiple levels. Now you step up in competition with a 9-game conference schedule. Houston, one of the hardest ones for me to leave off because they bring back a lot of players that started 6 or more games, 12 to be exact. They're only one of 18 teams in the country that can say that. But they lose a lot of real production last year from a team that won 10 games. And even a really good staff, who I have the utmost respect for, they need a little bit of a beat to reload. So a small step back, but not a visible decline. South Carolina, Lenora Sellers turned down the draft, which is tough to do. Edge rusher Dylan Stewart's back. You get your receiver, hopefully, and Nick Harbor finally takes that step that we've been waiting for. But the big reason why they were even on this list is Kendall Briles, who's now running the offense. You also look at the offensive line. That was a group that graded among the worst last year in the Power Four. They struggled running the football, and the rebuild up front is a little bit brand new. You also have one of the hardest schedules in America, and I can't rank them just yet, but write them down. Because if there's one team that forces their way onto the top 25 by October, this is probably the one. The Auburn Tigers. Alex Golish comes up from USF, brings his quarterback Byron Brown, which is the same thing that we've seen happen multiple times, and it's worked really well. And I like it a lot with this group. I really do. But if you look at Brown, he's got to prove that he can do it in the SEC. I think he can. However, it is a violent jump in competition. So right now, Auburn is a bit more dangerous than they are trustworthy, and a preseason poll is a bit of a trust exercise. The Nebraska Cornhuskers, they are one of the top teams in the country when it comes to returning snap production. They bring back a bunch of starters, so the continuity is real, and I think this group could start really fast. You look at the front half of their schedule, things look really nice for them, but the back half of that schedule is brutal. And their quarterback play with Anthony Calandria, it could generate upsets in both directions. He could elevate and pull off a stunner. He could also potentially throw an interception, and that leads to a loss that none of us are forecasting right now. The Virginia Cavaliers, they were 11-3 last year, and that was a completely real record. However, it was a bit of an all-in season. And the bill came due. There's not a lot of continuity, especially at quarterback. They also have a lot to prove, so they are on the first out list as well. Vanderbilt, you bring back the head coach. Both coordinators are back, and they had a 10-win season last year. But they're one of the least experienced teams in the Power Four right now based on returning production. And that's kind of a strange combination. That's why I can't right now justify them being in the top 25. Plus, I have to see them adequately replace Diego Pavia before they warrant consideration. The Illinois Fighting Illini. No returning defense coordinator, new quarterback, still bullish on them. Long list of holes. I do not doubt the program. It's just the timeline right now is a little bit fuzzy for me to put them in the preseason top 25. And the last one, the TCU Horned Frogs. Some people have them in the top 25. I think they have a chance to be very, very good. If I'm wrong about who the top team is, maybe outside of Texas Tech and BYU in the Big 12, I think TCU has a strong argument to make. It's just right now there are a few unknowns that don't have me feeling good enough about them just yet to warrant them being in the top 25. And then finally, I do not have a group of 6 team right now that's in the top 25. We all know that one of them is going to the college football playoff. The format guarantees it. But experience in this sport kind of flows in one direction in some ways. And the group of 6 is being forced on occasion to annually rebuild because the Power Four, they get to go and just get whoever they want. So that's a real honest reason that right now, all the G6 programs, they'll get there eventually, but too many unknowns going into the season to justify a top 25 ranking. At number 25, we start with the Utah Utes, a team that can win 11 games, right? They bring back some decent quality. One of the fewest, though, when it comes to returning starters on the entire list. And that's the entire reason why a program that won as many games as they did last year is starting at 25 and not at 15. 11-2 last year, did a great job in the Las Vegas Bowl. And the thing came apart in a way that's difficult to imagine for a team that has been the model of stability. Kyle Whittingham steps down in December after 21 years. He then leaves 14 days later. He's the head coach of the Michigan Wolverines. He then goes on to take 6 Utah assistants with him, including the offensive coordinator, plus an edge rusher, a starting corner, a great receiver, and all those guys are now projected to be among the better players on Michigan's roster. So Morton Scalley inherits a program that he was promised, minus a real chunk of the staff and a roster that he expected to inherit. Now, that's all before the draft, before Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu, plus a defensive end. You add all that up, and there's a bunch of new pieces along the offensive line. I mean, all five. In the same year, where a first-year head coach lost 6 assistants and the OC, you also got to replace 2 difference-making edge rushers that combined for 16 sacks. And we know rebuilding the offensive line is one of the toughest repairs in football, right? Because it's one position group where continuity is the skill. Well, now here's what everyone's buried, though, and it's the reason why Utah's on the list at all and not 15 spots outside of it, is that they returned their starting quarterback and leading rusher off an offense that averaged over 41 points a game, went for over 482 a game last year. Devin Dampier is back. He also has his backup, Bird Ficklin, back as well. It's probably good enough to start just about anywhere else, and he chose to stay. You bring back a running back in Wayshawn Parker that went for nearly 1,000 yards at over 6.5 a carry. You have an offensive coordinator in Kevin McGivern that will take over and is not planning on blowing up the scheme. They're going to keep doing what they've done. And Scaley has already called the receiver room one of the better groups that he's been around since he's been at Utah. Braden Pagan and Scholes combining for over 1,700 yards last year at their previous spots. As far as Scaley himself, he's been on staff for a while. He's been running the defense for a decade. And he even led it there as a player and was a conference defensive player of the year. So he's not necessarily a caretaker. He is the guy that they've been protecting for a decade. So 25th to me is saying that Utah's floor is always fine because Utah's floor is a really well-coached defense and a scoreboard operator that's probably going to stay busy given the way they've played offense last year. The ceiling, however, is a little bit difficult to predict right now with all the new turnover along both lines of scrimmage. At number 24, it's the SMU Mustangs. It's Rhett Lashley, who's 31-10 over the last 3 years and 14-2 in regular season ACC games since joining the league back in 24. That's an absurd number, and it almost you have to say it multiple times before you start to believe it. Now, Kevin Jennings is back for year 3 as a starter, which is amazing here in 2026. He's a homegrown quarterback with a bunch of starts there in his name with 26 career starts, more than 8,000 yards of total offense, and 65 touchdowns. If you look at what he did last year, completed 66% of his throws for over 3,600 yards, hit third most passing production in the ACC. He also had 30 touchdowns with 26 through the air and 4 on the ground. The problem is he threw 13 picks, and that's a number that nobody really wants to quote when they bring up real Heisman odds. So 26 and 13 is not an elite ratio. It's a very good quarterback that has one little thing left to clean up. So why are they 24th when the media picked them to finish second in the ACC? Because of what came back and what did not. They returned 12 starters, which is really, really good, but you have to ask which ones. You lose a couple of top rushers, you lose 4 of your top 5 wide receivers. Now, we know Jennings is the constant, and everything around him is talented, but in some ways a bit unproven, which is a polite way of saying that we haven't yet seen that skill group collectively operate against Power 4 competition. On defense, you lose a leading tackler, leading pass rusher, 2 of the most load-bearing individual jobs on that side of the ball. Coordinator's gone as well. So in fairness, Lashley made a smart point about that too, because every coordinator hire was an internal promotion. Maurice Crum now is calling it with Ricky Hunley beside him. Both those guys have been co-coordinators in the building for the last couple of years. So while it's 3 new titles, it's not 3 new schemes. That matters. Here's the thing about last season that makes this year's schedule so strange. They went into Death Valley last year and beat Clemson 35-24. They do not play Clemson this year. They do not play Miami this year. They do go to Notre Dame in November, and that's the one game that might actually tell us something. They also open up at Florida State. They play at Louisville on September 19th, so we will get an early read on what the Mustangs are all about. But a schedule that removes 2 of the best teams in your league is a pretty clear path to 9, maybe 10 wins, but it might teach us very little. Now, you got a good right tackle in P.J. Williams, legitimate preseason All-American buzz, probably the best player on the roster, not named Jennings. But when the 2 hardest games get removed from your schedule and 4 of your top 5 receivers get removed from your offense, I think 24 is about right with where the Mustangs will start the season. At number 23, it's the Louisville Cardinals. They return a bunch, 14 starters from a year ago. But that might be a bit of a misleading number because the offense feels pretty loaded. The defense, a lot of new things to iron out. Now, Jeff Brom, he's in year 4 at his alma mater. We know they've done a great job. You get his offensive coordinator back and Brian Brom, his brother, 4 years running the offense. Those two together do a terrific job putting together a plan on a week-to-week basis. Isaac Brown's back at running back. He could be the engine of the entire offense. He ran for 884 last year, 7 touchdowns, nearly 9 yards a carry. He also missed 4 games. And Brom said that they're already managing his reps carefully throughout camp. They bring in Lincoln Kienholz from Ohio State. And this is going to be the 3rd straight year where Louisville will start a quarterback that arrived from somewhere else. And at some point, that stops being a strategy and starts becoming a bit of an identity. Now, here's the problem. They're replacing a bunch of pieces on the defensive side. They say 7 starters that have to be replaced. They do have new co-coordinators in Mark Ivey and Steve Ellis after Ron English stepped away for a year to watch his son's final season at Navy, which is a wonderful reason to leave a job. And I have 0 notes whatsoever. That's tremendous, right? But football consequence is that this defense losing a bunch of starters, simultaneously hearing from a new voice, potentially an altered call sheet, maybe a slightly new set of Saturday adjustments. So the honest counterpoint, though, and it comes from within the building, if you listen to Louisville's players over the last couple of weeks and you listen to the coaches, they actually think that the defense could be the strength of the football team, not the offense, which is pretty optimistic. And there's the real something to build on, right? Clev Lubin is up front. He is a take over the game edge defender, right? He is big time. AJ Green as well. Tayon Holloway in there. Stanquan Clark, Antonio Watts, D'Amico Kennedy. These guys are all potentially legitimate difference makers, a very strong portal class. But here's what makes Louisville one of the most interesting week 1 teams in America. They're going to find out real quick where they stand. They open against a team that we'll hear from a little later on the list, as in they opened against a Heisman finalist in Ole Miss. And you want to know whether a defense replacing that much turnover on that side of the ball with a couple new coordinators? Well, you're going to find out in about 3 weeks, in about the first quarter, in that first game from Nashville. At number 22, it's the Florida Gators. Now, this is where I ask you to trust the original rule. Florida went 4-8 last year. Their 4th losing season in the last 5 years. And the projections right now, if you were to look way too far in advance, are around 6-6, 7-5 in that vicinity. The coaches left them out of the top 25 entirely, but they were one of the first teams out. So they were closer to being ranked than just about anyone else that was missed. I have them 22nd. And the models are going to measure how good a team actually is. And I have Florida maybe in the high teens in some places. But there is a little bit of an ugly record projection that exists because they play a really difficult schedule. Now, when you get to the football, there is real football here. John Summerall comes over from Tulane. He's got 12 new assistants, and he did the one thing that almost nobody does anymore. He retained 60 players off the previous roster before adding a bunch of transfers and a bunch of freshmen on top. So it's not a complete teardown. It's a bit of a renovation where the walls are still standing. And it's why Florida brings back 13 starters despite total staff turnover. He also signed a recruiting class that was one of the top 15 nationally, and he signed it while he was still the head coach of Tulane, which tells you something about the job that he had already done. Now, DJ Lagway is gone, and I want to be careful here because the talent with DJ Lagway was never really in question. He threw 16 touchdowns. However, he led the SEC in interceptions. His passer rating was lower than every quarterback in the conference but one. So the quarterback change is not necessarily a subtraction. It's a bit of a reset. And here's the detail that has me higher than potentially the field when it comes to evaluating Florida. Aaron Philo is transferring over from Georgia Tech, and Buster Faulkner is the new offensive coordinator. And Faulkner coached Philo already when they were together there in Atlanta. And the quarterback and the play caller arriving in the same building, from the same building, installing the same offense that they've both installed multiple times. That's a shortcut that almost no first-year staff gets to take, and it could be worth 2 or 3 games over the course of the season. Now, Tramel Jones, he's the other option, has a bigger arm, potentially even a higher ceiling when it comes to just flat-out throwing the football, and there is no timeline on the quarterback decision, but on paper, this is a really good roster, potentially even a top 15 roster, and you can make a strong argument it's a top 4 or 5 receiver group, weapon group. I just am having a hard time looking past the schedule, so I'm not going to pretend that I can. But this is a very solid football team that I think has a chance to be much better than the experts predict this year. The 21st ranked Iowa Hawkeyes. They bring back 9 starters. That's one of the fewest on the board, but they're 21st. They're not 16th, right? So there are some new faces up and down both sides of the ball, also some new faces in special teams as well. This team won 9 games last year. But you start at quarterback like we always do because Kirk Ferentz, they're not going to pick one, not yet at least. It's either Jeremy Hicklinski or Hank Brown. And Hicklinski comes from Wake Forest, Brown from Auburn. Both spent last season sitting behind Mark Gronowski. And at Big Ten Media Days, Ferentz flat out said they have no clue where this thing is going to go. So he's going to wait until mid-August. He waited till mid-August last year to name Gronowski. So it's not a feature. This is the way they do things. It's not a crisis by any stretch. The bigger issue, however, is up front. Iowa has to replace 3 starters off an offensive line that won the Joe Moore Award last year as the best in the country. And Ferentz responded by doing the single most Kirk Ferentz thing available to any human being. He says, we'll get a running back, right? So they go out and they get LJ Phillips, who went for over 1,900 yards at South Dakota. So that's not a statistical line. That is workload, man. And it's arriving at the one program in America that spent 25 years proving they can win 8 or 9 games with great defense and a punter that you would take in the 4th round and somebody who's going to carry it 25 times every single week. And he will not do it alone. They still have quality pieces back, so it could become a bit of a running back by committee approach. But this committee with an FCS rushing champion on it is a pretty good committee to start with. So here's why structure matters more at Iowa than it would maybe at anywhere else. Because Iowa's formula does not require the quarterback to be elite. It requires him to be careful. So that is a much lower bar to clear in year number 1 as a starter. That's why 9 returning starters is less scary in Iowa City than it would be, say, in Baton Rouge. Now, the ceiling is capped for the exact same reason. This configuration has not yet produced an 11-win combination in the modern era of college football. But they do have some interesting games. I mean, trip to Washington. And if you've watching Iowa against Washington, that's going to be awesome. So I think 21st is, for me, kind of refusing to bet against the formula because the formula is proven effective over the course of multiple decades. But there's also a little bit of hesitance towards buying the ceiling right now with so many unknowns on that roster. Now on to number 20, and it's the Michigan Wolverines. Remember Utah, who we talked about just 5 spots ago? Well, this is the other half of that divorce, right? Plus a wrinkle that not a lot of people have connected. Now, Kyle Whittingham, he's 66 years old. He's got 177 career wins. He's got 8 10-win seasons. He takes over the job after Sharon Moore was fired. And he didn't just raid Utah either. He goes to BYU and takes Jay Hill, who built arguably the best defense in the Big 12 last year. Those guys are now working together. They're in maize and blue. So Whittingham assembles his Michigan staff by strip mining the Big 12. And both programs he took from sit on this list within a handful of spots of the Wolverines. That is one story if I told you 3 times, and we're kind of in the middle of it right now. Now, what Michigan has is real. They have a lot of returning quality, 14 returning starters. Bryce Underwood is back at quarterback. That could be the most single valuable asset in the sport. You have Jordan Marshall, who's a genuine every down back. And Marshall's coming off 930 plus yards, 10 touchdowns as a sophomore. And the backfield alongside Hyder and others, like that backfield's going to be excellent. This could be one of the better backfields in the sport. There are some question marks surrounding tight end. And I think people will tell you it's one of the least settled spots right now on the offense. Sounds like Zach Marshall's going to kind of have the inside track, and that matters because tight end play carries a lot more weight in this Whittingham-Beck offense than it does in most. So why are they 20th when most models say they're 14th or 15th? Well, 3 things stacked on top of each other. You had 6 players that went in the NFL draft. Every coordinator's new. Every system is new. The schedule includes 4 opponents who were in last year's playoff. And I want to say this plainly because it will sound like a knock, but it's not. I think Michigan's roster might be better than 20th. But I think this season has a chance to be maybe a little bumpier than the roster itself because a brand new staff installing brand new everything against 4 playoff teams is exactly how a super talented team goes 8-4 for the reasons that have nothing to do with the talent itself. So year 2, that's when I think Michigan could become a problem for people. So maybe a little bearish on the Wolverines this year, but I think a big step forward could be expected in 2027. At number 19, it's the Washington Huskies. Now, I have the Huskies ahead of Michigan, and I want to spend real time there because the most consequential thing happened in college football this offseason happened in Seattle, and it got about a day and a half of coverage because Damon Williams, he was terrific last year. Over 3,000 yards, 25-8 touchdown interception ratio. He had a hand in 31 total scores in his first full year as the starter. Now, he's not the biggest guy in the world, but he is a problem when a play breaks down. And he's probably the most common explosive play last year for Washington was Damon Williams running around and making the play. And then signs a deal. He flirts with the transfer portal, thought maybe he was going to end up at LSU, and then Washington signaled he was prepared to go to court. And then 48 hours later, he was back. He has since called it really bad advice, right? So understand what that actually was. It was an NIL agreement, and it got awkward there for a little bit, but I do think it's going to work out just fine. It feels like there is a newfound commitment there for the Huskies, and I think the football underneath it all has a chance to take a huge step forward as well because this group returns 14 starters. 4 along the offensive line, which is a position group that really drives continuity as much as anything. You still have Ryan Walters running the defense and really important retention in the building there. Now, there is a wrinkle that Jed Fish loses OC, didn't necessarily replace him. He's going to call it himself, which is great. He's been terrific for a long time. He's got JP Lossman coaching the quarterbacks too. So I like that more than the industry seems to. A head coach who recruited his quarterback out of high school, who followed him to a second school, just spent the offseason fighting to keep him. He's now the man calling his plays. So I think that's not necessarily a downgrade. That's alignment. And alignment is worth some real wins this year. So I really like Washington to be a bit of a spoiler this year in the Big Ten. Let's go next to 18. It's the Clemson Tigers. And let me start with the number that should terrify everybody's reading this chart, right? Clemson, they led the entire country in returning production heading into last year and went 7-6. This year, they returned 53% of their production, which ranks 60th nationally, and they bring back just 10 starters. So the chart got worse, and I have them 8 spots higher than most people had them in August of last year. So here's why. Clemson had a bunch of guys drafted last year in 2026. They had 9. That's a school record tying number for a team that finished just barely above 500, which tells you the talent wasn't ever really the issue. They lost 14 players of the portal and responded with the largest incoming transfer portal class in program history. They brought in 11 guys. Now, the fix is on offense, and it's a familiar face. Chad Morris is back running that offense. And the quarterback situation is the first real competition Clemson has had since 2018. That was when Trevor Lawrence ultimately beat out Kelly Bryant after 3 or 4 games. So Christopher Vezina, he's the guy to start with. And as Dabo said, he's got the pole position. Now he has one real audition on tape as well. So he started a midseason game last year against SMU, threw for over 315 yards and 3 touchdowns. They did lose that game. And losing to SMU, no shame in that. They were a really explosive offense. But behind Vezina is Tate Reynolds, who has kind of shaken up the race a little bit. And Dabo made a point of saying that they deliberately did not go get, in his words, a shiny object out of the portal. That is a bit of a philosophical stand, and whether it will look principled or stubborn will be determined by Halloween. What makes me comfortable, though, is that I look at what Vezina and or Reynolds, what they have to throw to. They have Bryant Wesco, who did a great job in just 7 games last year, went for over 530 yards, had a season-ending injury, but he's full go for camp. TJ Moore led the team last year, had over 830 yards. It's a really good 1-2 punch. You also got Naeem Burrows as a breakout candidate that everyone in the building keeps bringing up unsolicited. You also have a couple of really good pieces at tight end. So you have an elite receiver room and pretty good crutch to hand a first-time starting quarterback. And it could very easily convert maybe a bad decision in a contested catch into a 15, 20-yard gain. Now, the offensive line has just 2 starters back, which is a real concern. And they open at LSU on September 5th, which, if you're keeping score, is going to be a really good team. You'll hear about them more here in just a little bit. But 18th right now for Clemson is saying that they're going to beat somebody they're probably not supposed to beat. But I am not paying August prices for a resurrection right now. I think they're going to be good. I think they're going to be real good. I just don't know if they're quite a playoff contender because there is, I think, a tougher path in the ACC than some might suggest. At number 17, I had the Tennessee Volunteers. They are one of the top teams as far as returning snaps. They bring back 13 players who started 6 or more games. And by the numbers, that's one of the more experienced rosters in the country. And it doesn't matter nearly as much as it probably should because of where the experience is missing. Now, Josh Heupel said it himself at Media Days. I think Tennessee is starting their 5th different quarterback in the last 5 years. It'll be either George McIntyre, a redshirt freshman, or Faison Brandon, a true freshman who was a top 10 recruit in America and picked Tennessee over a handful of other programs. And the reporting line this week is that McIntyre had a really good first week of practice, that Brandon, though, still, everyone continues to maintain this stance, he's got the highest ceiling. Now, Heupel says that Brandon's up to 225 pounds, can be used in the run game, and that Brandon has, in Josh Heupel's words, really grabbed onto the offense. Now, they tried to avoid this. They went after some guys in the portal, Sam Levitt. They tried to get Joey Aguilar back. So a kid that's never started a college game gets handed a 9-game SEC schedule that's ranks one of the toughest schedules in the country. So here's why they're 17th and not necessarily at the bottom of this list, is that Jim Knowles is running the defense. And this is a man that has called plays for a national championship winning defense at Ohio State in 24, walking into a room with a bunch of experience on that side of the ball. And that's a really good situation for a coordinator. You have veteran personnel, you got a new voice, you got a mandate, and the offense, it's systematically very friendly for an inexperienced quarterback in a way that most offenses are not. Now, Heupel's system, they can build it on tempo, very defined reads, throws that come out on time, throws that go to the boundary, but also sprinkle in some downfield shots as well. And that's precisely what you want when your starter might be 19 or 18 years old. So Heupel also told you exactly what worries him. Now, his line is that you kind of have to learn how to take care of the football, manage the game, because catastrophic plays are the difference in a league when the margins are this slim. That's not a coach describing the one thing a true freshman does wrong. The schedule does give them a bit of a runway. You get Furman at home. You then have to go to Georgia Tech. So there's 1 week where you kind of get to figure out, all right, this guy does this guy does that. The math is simple, right? If the quarterback doesn't play well, then this is a team that'll be 6-6, 7-5, maybe 8-4 because the run game and the defense was great. But if the quarterback is good, potentially very good, Knowles could win them 3 games by himself. This could be a real problem team when we fast forward to November. So I'm betting on the coordinator, the returning experience as well, and I think their quarterback play is going to be adequate. So I actually flirted with having Tennessee quite a bit higher than this. But when you look at the teams right in front of them, I think 17 is an appropriate starting point. At number 16 is the BYU Cougars. They have everybody back, right? 3rd nationally in returning snaps. They bring back 13 players that started a bunch of games off a team that went 12-2 and played in the Big 12 championship game. I have them 16th, which probably requires a bit of an explanation. Let's start with the good, because Bear Bachmeier is legit at quarterback. They started a true freshman quarterback for the first time in program history and won 12 games doing it. That's remarkable, and it should not be waved away. Here's the growth area, and it showed up in the games that decided their season. Bachmeier threw 7 interceptions last year. 3 of them came in one matchup against Texas Tech. And the reason is a football problem, not necessarily a talent problem. Texas Tech's pass rush was dominant, and BYU had to keep a back, a tight end, maybe both, in there to protect him, which didn't allow for a lot of receivers to go out there running routes against 7 defenders. So that's tough math to win. And Bachmeier was not yet ready to make a defense pay over the top for stacking the box, which brings me to an actual concern. And it's the reason why 3rd nationally in returning snaps does not move me more, because most of the 2025 receiving core is gone. So JoJo Phillips, Tiger Bachmeier, T. Nakua are back, but we're all a little bit limited last year maybe not necessarily in a position where they were featured. So we generally don't know exactly what to expect from the weaponry. But Kyle Casper comes over from Oregon. You got Walker Lyons coming in at tight end from SC. Casper didn't play a ton in Eugene, but that's the exact production that BYU needs and they don't have a ton of. Now, the offensive line should be excellent. I love what they have up front. I also think LJ Martin is incredible at running back. He's in his fourth and final year with a lot of school records that are within reach. Now, the defense, a little bit of a swing. Jay Hill built one of the best units in the league, leaves for Michigan. Kelly Papinga takes over, and the defensive line has a chance to be really disruptive. I think this D-line's got a chance to be big time, really big time. So they've recruited that spot really well over the last few years, probably better than I can remember them recruiting quite some time. So BYU is going to have a very, very good record. However, that record, they'll be built in a league without a super elite team in it. So those are different things. And I'm about to explain exactly why that is here in just a moment. But I love the Cougars this year. I think they could very easily win the Big 12 and secure a playoff spot. At number 15, it's the Texas Tech Red Raiders. And this is one I'm going to get a lot of messages about. So let me put it all on the table all at once, right? Texas Tech won 12 games last year and won the Big 12. They returned 13 players, okay? They ranked 21st nationally in returning snaps. Now, every computer model in America has them between 7th and 10th in the country. And understandably, and the projections have them winning more games this year than anyone else for the most part, more than Ohio State, more than Notre Dame, more than anybody. And I have them 15th. Well, here's why. The argument comes from the same models that love them. Those projections give Texas Tech roughly a 3.5% chance to win a national championship. Most wins in America and roughly the 9th best odds of actually winning it all. So the gap is not necessarily a bug. The gap is that Texas Tech right now is playing the 71st hardest schedule in the country. That's arguably the softest slate of anyone in the top 25. And a schedule like that might manufacture a beautiful record without telling you exactly what the team is. Now, the personnel, because this is where returning production, it could maybe mislead you just a little bit. Yeah, you get 13 starters back. And the identity of the team was the defense, right? And the defense, what's left on the defense? We know David Bailey's gone. We know Romello Height is gone. Jacob Rodriguez is gone. So I love that Texas Tech brought in so many quality pieces in the portal. Man, you lost some real difference makers off last year, especially Bailey and Rodriguez. Like, I don't care how good the guys are that replace them. Those are huge shoes to fill, especially when we just talked about BYU a moment ago and saying how the pass rush completely overwhelmed BYU and they didn't give BYU much of a chance. So that pass rush, it might look a little different this year. So replacing 3 really disruptive front 7 players with returning snaps at other positions, pass rush is a tough thing to recreate over and over and over again. The one gap last year between being a really, really good team and a super elite team was quarterback play. And you thought you solved that problem with Brennan Sorsby. Well, he's not walking through that door because he's ineligible, right? He decides now to move on to the NFL. That's exactly what happened. So Will Hammond's going to be the quarterback. And I really like Will Hammond, right? By the way, watching him play last year at times, I thought he played at a high level. But he did tear his ACL on October 25th. He did play in a handful of games, looked good in those games with 7-3 touchdown interception ratio, does have mobility that you didn't have a year ago, ran for over 290 yards last year and 5 scores. So he's a guy that came off the bench last year and beat Utah 34-10. So the talent is real. The knees may be a slight variable, but I think he's going to be just fine. I think the running game should be good enough to maybe carry the load a little bit while he finds his footing. So let me be clear about what I'm saying because it'll get misheard every year. I'm not saying that Texas Tech's not going to be a 10-win team. I think they have a chance to be a 10-win team. I think they got a real chance to win the Big 12 and make the college football playoff. I mean, we know that if they win their league, the format guarantees that they will be in the field. And I've said this before. I don't believe right now that a Big 12 team is capable of winning a national championship, and there's not enough on this roster that has changed my mind. So they could very well have the prettiest record in America. But I'm telling you right now in August, that being one of the top 10 teams as far as record does not necessarily mean that you are one of the top 10 teams as far as football quality. So we'll find out. Big believer in Texas Tech, but after last year's playoff performance, I still think there is an awful lot to prove, which is why they start the season for me at number 15. At number 14, it's the LSU Tigers. Now, Lane Kiffin is in Baton Rouge. He didn't arrive quietly. He goes out, gets the number one transfer class in America, headlined by Sam Leavitt at quarterback. And we know that a lot of teams wanted Sam Leavitt. They also have Blake Baker still running the defense, which might be the most important thing that happened in the building all off season. You also get Whit Weeks back there in the middle of it all after an ankle injury held him just to 8 games last year. So 2 things to know about Sam Leavitt before you get really, really excited. Now, he's coming off a foot injury, but Kiffin tells us he's at full strength. I'm not concerned about that. They bring back some quality pieces. On paper, that should be good. They bring back a bunch of starters. So why are they 14th, which is 5, 6, 7 spots lower than the rest of the industry has them? Because returning production and assembled production are not the same thing. And this list is this year's best case study in the difference, because LSU went 7-6 last year, and they had a really good roster, by the way. Now they have a new head coach, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback, a roster that was largely put together in the portal over the course of about 4 or 5 weeks. And Kiffin's own words after the first couple days of fall camp is that so many guys are brand new. And I have watched a ton of programs try to speed run continuity with a great transfer class. And that works sometimes, but there's also times when it doesn't work very well. But we know that in the future, the foundation will be laid for growth moving forward. So there's a real difference between collecting talent and building a team. The first takes a checkbook and a really good portal season. The second takes training camp. The second takes time. The second takes understanding. And one bad Saturday in October and a quarterback who has absorbed a bunch of hits and a bunch of offensive linemen that are still trying to instinctively figure out where to go, that takes time. And you can only kind of survive into that. So I believe this. I believe that Lane Kiffin is going to win big at LSU. I just don't know if year one is the year where it all clicks. And the schedule, guys, the schedule, no one's really identifying the schedule as an absolute beast. And we know that no one's going to be patient while they sort things out. But opening against Clemson, having 9 difficult SEC games, there could be a couple growing pains here, which is why I have them a little lower than most. But the ceiling for LSU is as high as anyone that we've listed on the show at this point. At number 13, it's the Penn State Nittany Lions. Now, Matt Campbell comes over from Iowa State and immediately did something that has not been done at this scale, or at least it doesn't feel like it's been done at the scale. He brings in 39 transfers, including Rocco Beck, who's a 3-year starter, the winningest quarterback in Iowa State history, brings in Carson Hansen out of the same backfield. 20 of those transfers are Campbell's own Iowa State players, including the top 5 pass catchers, right? Taylor Mauser, who ran that offense in Ames as well, he's came too. So Penn State returns a bunch of starters on top of it all. So think about what that actually is. On paper, you got new head coach, new staff, new quarterback. That's a profile of a team that might be 7-5, right? But in reality, a quarterback and a head coach who have run the same offense together for 3 years, they just changed addresses in a package deal, plus 39 players who already know the install, plus a bunch of returning starters from the previous regime. This is not a rebuild. It's just a little bit of a relocation and a bit of an identity shift. Now, it does expose the limit of returning production as kind of a concept, because the metric has no way to account for a quarterback who is new to the roster. However, he's 3 years deep in the playbook. The projections for Penn State have them winning 9 games. That's the best record projection of anyone outside of the top 10, excluding Texas Tech. And yes, a schedule that is ranked in the 60s really helps that. So here's what I'm watching. I think Beck is real deal. I think he's really good. He's never seen a Big Ten schedule, and there is a meaningful difference between the fronts he's used to and what Ohio State or Oregon will show him in the fourth quarter. He also missed some time in spring recovering from an off-season surgery. So you look at him too, last year maybe slightly regressed statistically, but he now enters camp with no limitations. And the running back job is a 3-way competition, so we'll see how that unfolds. There's a bunch of jobs that are still genuinely open. Left tackle, for example, we'll figure out what's going on there. Who's going to be the defensive ends? We know one, but who's going to be the other? And we know that they've been working some hybrids in at those positions. But the offense, we know the offense is going to be operational week 1. which is pretty good place to start. And whether it's good enough in November is the question. That's exactly why they're 13th and not 9th. But I am actually very encouraged by a potential bounce back for Penn State this upcoming season. That's why they come in at number 13. At number 12, it's the USC Trojans. Now, they returned 15 players who started a bunch of games for them last year. They're 10th nationally in returning snaps, and there are not a lot of teams that have as much returning snaps as the Trojans do. So this is the most experienced roster on this half of the board. All 5 starting offensive linemen are back. They did lose Killian O'Connor there in an unfortunate injury in fall camp, but the offensive line is part of why I'm really optimistic. It's a deep group. It's a talented group, and these guys have played a lot of football together. Jane Mayava is back at quarterback. The recruiting class was ranked number 1 in the country. So USC has a stable, veteran, physically mature offense, and USC's offense has never really been the problem, right? The problem is that USC, they'll score 38 and they might give up 41. And you cannot outrun that in the Big Ten, especially in November when it might be 34 degrees and the game is being decided along the line of scrimmage, which is why this hire matters more than anything that's happened on the offensive side of the ball. Gary Patterson is now running the defense. This man has won a lot of football games as the head coach at TCU. And he did it with a defense that where structurally they're very sound. They didn't necessarily beat themselves, which is the precise opposite of what SC was for a number of years. And they improved a little bit, but now they have a chance to maybe take the next step. Now, they did lose some significant targets in the receiver core, so there might be some reconfiguring to do around Mayava in the passing attack. But one more thing that USC has, I think, that works in their favor. They start fall camp a little earlier than just about everybody else on the board. They do have to play week 0. That's on August 29th against San Jose State in the Coliseum. So SC is maybe the first team on this entire list that you're going to get to watch. And Riley has not yet delivered a playoff berth in his 4 seasons. But the defense should be improved. The defense should be significantly improved. And there are sources that are saying that this is the best defense Lincoln Riley's had, and it's not close. Emphasize that. It's not close. I'll take their word for it. That matters a lot. And if you look at the inconsistent spot last year, it might have been a linebacker. Well, they go out and they added a couple pieces, one from Michigan State, one from Penn State. Those guys are going to be on the edges. Like, they're going to be in good shape. So 12th right now for SC is me buying experience, believing in the hire of Gary Patterson, and just waiting 1 November before I go a little higher. If Patterson can get this unit to play at an above average level, is a 10-win football team. And they will be way too low at number 12. If they're average, this is probably about right. If they're below average, then they could find themselves in the upper teens. But I am a believer in the USC Trojans this year. That's why they're in at number 12. At number 11, it's the Ole Miss Rebels. And Ole Miss returns a lot of quality pieces off of a 13-2 season that ended in the playoff semifinal with a tough loss to Miami, a game that they were absolutely good enough to win. Then Lane leaves for LSU, and the staff players with him, right, with Pete Golding, and he's been with us on this show. We watched what he did in the playoff last year. He's one of the best defensive minds in the sport. It's his first full off season running the program, and the single biggest thing they got back was Trinidad Chambliss, right? He was denied initially a 6th year. He sued, and then he was granted injunction, and he's ready to roll, right? So the courts cleared Trinidad Chambliss. He's back. He's one of the best quarterbacks in America. So you get back a quarterback that throws for nearly 4,000 last year. That's the most in the SEC. He had 22 touchdowns against just 3 interceptions. He ran for another 500 plus and 8 scores on the ground. He finished 8th in the Heisman voting. 3 interceptions in a full season in that league. As a guy that came up and learned the offense in August of last year, pretty good starting point. And Keywan Lacey's back as well. And he should have been mentioned right there alongside Chambliss as one of the most important pieces in the sport. He went for over 1,500 last year and 24 touchdowns on the ground. So those two guys, I mean, first of all, the rushing for Lacey, I mean, program records. He's a first-team All-American. He was a Doak Walker finalist. He did it in his first year after transferring over from Missouri. So Ole Miss returns a quarterback who finished 8th in the Heisman voting and a running back who set multiple school records in the same backfield. So the school is running a Heisman campaign for both of them all at once. So why are they 11th and not 6th? Well, two reasons. And they're kind of the difference between returning production and returning the right production. The biggest question for me for Ole Miss is the wide receiver weapons from a year ago. Those guys are gone. That's a hole. The offensive line, the interior, that's a strength, right? You bring all three guys back guard to guard. But tackle right now, especially the right side, that's a little bit up for grabs. And the best news out of the first couple days of fall camp was that the defense, where Pete Golding singled out individual dudes in Jordan Renaud and Edwin Joseph, those guys missed some time in spring. Both appeared to have taken a real jump over the summer. We know Chan was outstanding, and we know he was outstanding to throw into guys that create a ton of separation, right? Those guys were legit. They also play a very difficult schedule. I think the schedule is much tougher this year than what it's been in the past. So here's my honest projection. I want it on the record here in August. This team has a chance to be better than they were last year. I really believe that. I think defensively at all three levels, they have a chance to be better. I think they're going to be deeper on the defensive line. It's going to be deeper at linebacker. Secondary last year was a bit of a headache. I think that group has a chance to be better. But I also, in saying that, this could be a team that has a couple more regular season losses. Both those things can be true. Because when it happens in November, I want you to remember that the reason why they're 11 and not 6 is not the roster, it's the schedule. The schedule is much tougher this year. And I believe this. I believe that Ole Miss will reload. I don't think they're rebuilding. I think they'll reload. I think they have a chance to be excellent. I just don't know if an 11-1 or a 10-2 is likely. 9-3 feels more realistic with some of the teams they're having to face, but still remain extremely optimistic about what Pete Golding's done. I think this team could very well find themselves back in the playoffs, and if they get in, they could become a problem yet again because of how dynamic their quarterback is. Before we get you out of here, I want to give you three things that I believe. Number one, I do think Faison Brandon will start at Tennessee before the SEC schedule is over. I actually think that the Vols finish better than anyone outside Knoxville is projecting. You get a bunch of experienced starters back. You get a national championship quality defensive coordinator. Different situation for a true freshman than what most people are picturing. Number two, South Carolina is going to finish the season ranked in the top 25. Now, they're not on my board today. I think they are going to be on someone's board by the middle of October. Now, Lenora Sellers combined with Kendall Briles, that's a really potent combination. I just have to see it first before I can justify having them in the top 25. And then number three, Texas Tech's going to win double-digit regular season games. I think they're going to make the college football playoff. And I still think even at that point, they might still be outside the top 10 for me in December. Both those things can be true at once. They can be elite from a record standpoint, but is the roster ready to compete against the top 6, 7, 8 teams in college football? We will find that out. So that's it. 25 through 11. We've given it to you. If you want to recap it, you can rewind and go check it out once again. You might agree with it. You might disagree with it. That's the beauty of where we're at. And that's the beauty of our top 25. We adjust every week. Like, this is a starting point. This is not the finish line. We will, if you're ranked 6th in the preseason and you look awful week 1, we'll drop you out of the top 25 in a heartbeat. That's how we do it. We're not stubborn enough to keep you in to prove ourselves right. We are doing our best to put these things together and put a lot of thought into it. We learned this too last year. It doesn't really matter where you start the season anymore. 12 teams get in the playoff. And like Indiana proved a year ago, a team that finished first in the country, 16-0, national champs, one of the best teams we've watched in the modern era, they started the season ranked 18th. So there is upward mobility in the current era of college football. You just got to take care of business. And of course, you got to stay healthy. So I'll leave you with this. The team that returns more of its snaps than anybody else in America, 66% of everything that it played last year, number one in the country, they have not been mentioned not one time today. Well, I think they're going to be coming up here in a couple of days when we get into our top 10. Go ahead and subscribe to the podcast, wherever you get the podcast. Go ahead and check us out on the ESPN College Football YouTube page. We really appreciate all of you guys for being with us, and we look forward to unveiling our top 10 just a couple days from now. So for all of us here at ACF, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.